Have you ever had the strange feeling that something invisible was quietly pulling you off your path? As if you set a clear direction for your life, yet somehow you keep drifting away from where you intended to go. It can feel like there's an unseen current shaping your reactions, guiding your attention, and influencing the decisions you make without you fully realizing it. According to a fascinating perspective on how reality works, this experience may not be just psychological. It suggests that there are subtle energy patterns in the environment that grow stronger through our emotional engagement. Every time we react intensely, whether through anger, fear, outrage, or even overwhelming excitement, we feed those patterns with attention. Our reaction becomes the hook that pulls us deeper into their influence. But the moment you begin to recognize these forces for what they are, something powerful changes. You stop feeding them automatically. Instead of getting caught in the emotional momentum, you simply observe what is happening and allow it to pass without attaching your energy to it. The moment you see the strings behind the scene, those strings begin to lose their power over you. Many people carry a quiet sense that they are playing a role in a story that someone else has written. They notice that certain reactions seem predictable, as if the lines have already been scripted in advance. This feeling often comes from a deeply rooted belief that life is something that happens to us rather than something we actively shape. From a young age, most of us are taught to adapt to circumstances rather than question how those circumstances form in the first place. We become highly skilled at reacting to problems, solving external challenges, and adjusting to whatever the world places in front of us. In many ways, our culture rewards this ability to react quickly and efficiently. But there is a hidden cost to living this way. When you see yourself only as the effect of external forces, you unknowingly limit your ability to become the cause of your own direction. You become excellent at responding to the world, yet rarely pause to consider that you may have far more influence over the unfolding of your experience than you were ever taught to believe. And that is where the perspective we are about to explore begins to turn the entire story upside down. It suggests that, instead of being a small boat tossed helplessly by the waves of circumstance, you might actually have the ability to learn how to ride those waves with awareness and intention. The perspective we're about to explore turns the entire conventional way of thinking about success, effort, and reality upside down. It comes from a concept known as reality transurfing, introduced by author Vadim Zeland. At first glance, the idea may sound abstract, but its core message is surprisingly practical. Instead of struggling against the waves of life, you can learn to move with them. Imagine the difference between a small boat being tossed around by the ocean and a surfer who studies the movement of the water and rides the wave with skill. The ocean is the same in both cases, but the relationship to it is completely different. That shift in perspective is the essence of this model. And before we go deeper, welcome to the Inner Code, a place where we explore the hidden patterns behind awareness, personal growth, and the way our inner world shapes the reality we experience. Now, according to this framework, reality is not just a fixed sequence of events happening randomly around you. Instead, it proposes the existence of what is sometimes described as an information field, a vast structure that contains every possible variation of events that could unfold. You can think of it like an enormous library that already holds the scripts for countless possible life stories. Within this field exist paths that lead to different outcomes: success or failure, opportunity or limitation, clarity or confusion. Every scenario is already present as a potential pattern waiting to be activated. But here is the critical insight. Your inner state, your thoughts, emotions, expectations, and beliefs, functions like a tuning mechanism that resonates with certain versions of reality within that field. In other words, your mindset acts almost like a signal that aligns you with particular life paths more easily than others. When someone repeatedly focuses on lack, fear, or limitation, their attention tends to gravitate towards situations that reinforce those same experiences. A person constantly worrying about financial instability, for example, often becomes highly sensitive to every sign of scarcity in their environment. Their attention keeps returning to the same pattern, and the more they focus on it, the more that pattern seems to appear in their life. It creates a loop that feels difficult to escape. This happens because most people mistake the reflection for the cause. They believe their external circumstances are creating their internal emotions, when in many cases the relationship runs in the opposite direction. Reality behaves more like a mirror with a slight delay. Your internal state appears first, and the outer environment gradually reflects that state back to you over time. Yet because the reflection does not appear instantly, it becomes easy to assume that your inner changes have no real influence. As a result, many people spend their energy trying to fight the reflection directly. They attempt to fix the external world without ever adjusting the inner image that the mirror is reflecting. It's similar to standing in front of a mirror and trying to wipe away a stain on the glass, not realizing the mark is actually on your own face. No matter how much effort you put into cleaning the mirror, the stain keeps appearing again and again. This is how many people move through life, reacting to the economy, reacting to the news, reacting to what others say about them, constantly adjusting their emotions based on events they believe they cannot control. Over time, this reactive way of living becomes exhausting. Your attention is scattered across countless distractions, and the energy that could be used to create something meaningful becomes drained by constant reaction. Instead of directing the flow of your own experience, you become someone who is simply responding to whatever the world throws at you next. The perspective we're exploring suggests a completely different approach. Instead of trying to force changes in the reflection, you begin by changing the image that is being reflected. The real work becomes internal. You learn to consciously manage your thoughts and emotional responses regardless of what is happening around you. When your inner state becomes more stable and intentional, the outer circumstances begin to reorganize themselves gradually in response. However, this raises an important question. If reality truly reflects our inner world, why does it often feel so solid and unchangeable? Why do circumstances sometimes appear fixed for long periods of time, even after we change the way we think about them? The answer lies in the nature of the mirror itself. The mirror of reality does not respond instantly. It reflects your inner state with a delay. And because of that delay, many people give up too early, assuming their internal shifts have no real effect. But once you understand that delay, you stop expecting immediate proof and begin focusing instead on maintaining a consistent internal signal. And that leads to the next critical part of this model, understanding the mechanics of intention. To move deeper into this model, we need to understand one of its most important mechanisms, intention. In everyday language, the word intention usually means simply wanting something or hoping that something will happen in the future. But in the framework we are exploring, intention carries a much more precise meaning. It represents a mental state where thought and resolve merge into a clear directive for action and direction. It is not merely wishing for a result, and it is not passive optimism. It is a focused orientation of your mind that influences how you move through the field of possibilities that surrounds you. Within this framework, intention is divided into two distinct forms: internal intention and external intention. Internal intention is the one most people already understand because it is deeply rooted in the way modern culture teaches us to achieve goals. Internal intention is the force of willpower. It is the energy you use when you push yourself to act, struggle, compete, and force outcomes through effort. It is the entrepreneur making hundreds of calls trying to secure a client, the athlete pushing through physical exhaustion to reach a performance goal, or the writer forcing themselves to produce page after page through sheer discipline. This type of intention operates within the current structure of physical reality. It attempts to move pieces on the board through direct action. And in many situations, this type of effort is absolutely necessary. Hard work, discipline, and persistence still play an important role in any meaningful achievement. However, the limitation of internal intention is that it relies entirely on force. It is similar to rowing a boat across a vast ocean using only a pair of oars. You may eventually reach your destination, but the journey is exhausting, slow, and often fragile. One unexpected storm or shift in conditions can undo a tremendous amount of effort. This is where the concept of external intention begins to change the entire perspective. External intention does not attempt to force reality into submission. Instead, it involves choosing a direction and allowing the environment to reorganize itself around that choice. Rather than pushing against the current reality, you align yourself with a version of reality where the outcome you seek already fits naturally. External intention emerges when your thoughts, emotions, and identity all point toward the same outcome. It is not the anxious desire for something you lack. It is a calm, internal certainty that the direction you have chosen already belongs to your path. You begin to embody the state of the person who naturally lives in that reality. A helpful way to understand this difference is through a simple analogy. Imagine sitting in a restaurant and ordering a meal. When you choose what you want from the menu, you do not beg the kitchen to prepare it. You do not panic about whether it will arrive. You simply place your order and trust the process that follows. That quiet confidence is much closer to the state of external intention than the emotional tension created by desperate desire. In this model, the many possible directions your life could take are described as lifelines. Each lifeline is a consistent chain of events unfolding through time, shaped by a particular pattern of beliefs, decisions, and reactions. On one lifeline, a business idea might fail because the timing, partnerships, and circumstances do not align. On another lifeline, that same idea might succeed because the surrounding conditions unfold differently. The shift between these lifelines rarely feels dramatic. Often it appears as small changes in circumstances, subtle coincidences, unexpected conversations, or new ideas that seem to arrive at the perfect moment. These shifts can feel almost mysterious, but within this framework they are understood as the result of internal alignment with a different path. However, there is another important factor that determines which lifeline a person follows, and that factor is the subconscious mind. Many of the most important decisions in life are not made consciously. They are influenced by deeply ingrained beliefs and emotional patterns that operate beneath the surface of awareness. These subconscious programs quietly guide thousands of micro-decisions every day. If a person's subconscious beliefs revolve around struggle, insecurity, or limitation, those internal patterns will repeatedly guide them towards situations that confirm those expectations. This is why people sometimes feel as if they are sabotaging their own goals. Their conscious mind may want success or freedom, but their subconscious patterns continue to steer them toward familiar conditions. Without a clear conscious direction, people fall into what some thinkers have called drifting. Drifting is the state of moving through life without a defined internal compass. Instead of choosing their own path, individuals in this state are carried along by the expectations, fears, and goals of other people. They end up investing their energy in building someone else's vision rather than shaping their own. In many ways, drifting feels like living as a supporting character in another person's story. Understanding intention, and especially the difference between internal and external intention, is the first step in stepping out of that passive role. When you become aware of how your thoughts, emotions, and identity interact with the possibilities around you, you begin to realize that the path you walk is not as fixed as it once seemed. Small shifts in awareness can gradually move you toward entirely different outcomes over time. Up to this point, the model may seem straightforward. Manage your inner state, choose your direction, and align your actions with the lifeline you want to move toward. But there is a powerful obstacle that constantly interferes with this process, and understanding it changes the way you see the world around you. According to the reality transurfing model, the environment we move through is not neutral. It is filled with energetic structures that actively compete for our attention and emotional energy. These structures form whenever large groups of people begin thinking and feeling in the same direction. Over time, their shared mental energy condenses into a kind of collective influence that starts behaving almost like a living system. In this framework, these structures are called pendulums. The name comes from the image of a swinging pendulum that grows stronger the more energy it receives. Once formed, a pendulum develops its own momentum. It does not exist to help or harm individuals directly. Its only purpose is to continue growing and sustaining itself. And the way it does that is by capturing human attention. Pendulums feed on emotional engagement. The more people react strongly to them, through excitement, fear, outrage, loyalty, or anger, the more energy the pendulum receives, and the more powerful it becomes. These pendulums appear in many forms throughout society. They can be political movements, cultural trends, ideological conflicts, viral social media debates, or even deeply ingrained family dynamics. Any system that organizes large numbers of people around a shared emotional narrative can become a pendulum. Some of them are massive and long-lasting, while others appear suddenly, dominate attention for a short period of time, and then disappear just as quickly. But regardless of their size, pendulums operate using the same psychological strategy. They create opposition. The easiest way to generate emotional energy is by dividing people into opposing sides. This is why so many movements frame their cause as a moral battle between us and them. One side becomes the defenders of truth, justice, or progress, while the other side is portrayed as misguided, dangerous, or ignorant. This polarization produces powerful emotional reactions, and those reactions feed the pendulum's momentum. Here is the key insight that many people overlook. It does not matter whether you support a pendulum or fight against it. In both cases, you are feeding it with your emotional energy. Strong enthusiasm strengthens it just as much as strong anger. When you argue against something obsessively, when you constantly react to it, when it occupies your thoughts throughout the day, your attention becomes the fuel that keeps its motion alive. This creates a trap for people who genuinely want to improve the world. They see something destructive and fight it passionately, believing they are weakening it. But within this model, intense emotional opposition can actually amplify the very force they are trying to resist. Pendulums thrive on conflict. The more tension they generate, the more energy flows into them. Because of this, the first strategy for dealing with pendulums is surprisingly simple. Stop feeding them. Instead of reacting emotionally, you observe them calmly. You acknowledge that the structure exists, but you refuse to give it your internal energy. This is not the same as ignorance or avoidance. It is a conscious choice to disengage emotionally from forces that attempt to pull your attention away from your chosen direction. Imagine a large swing moving back and forth. If you try to stop it by pushing against it, you become part of its movement. But if you simply step aside and allow it to swing without your participation, it eventually loses momentum. The same principle applies to pendulums. When they can no longer provoke strong emotional reactions from you, their influence over your attention weakens. A second strategy involves understanding the human motivations behind them. Many pendulums gain power because they amplify fear, insecurity, or frustration that already exists within people. When you approach these situations with empathy rather than judgment, you avoid becoming trapped in the emotional polarization that pendulums rely on. You can understand why others feel the way they do without being pulled into the conflict yourself. In doing so, your internal state remains stable rather than reactive. There is also a deeper reason why certain pendulums affect some people more strongly than others. Pendulums often hook into emotional patterns that already exist within us. If someone carries a deep fear of scarcity, they will be far more sensitive to narratives about economic collapse. If someone fears rejection, they may react strongly to social conflicts that echo that fear. In other words, pendulums resonate with vulnerabilities that already exist in our inner landscape. This means that one of the most powerful forms of protection is internal awareness. When you identify the beliefs and emotional patterns that make you reactive, you gradually reduce the entry points through which these external forces can influence you. As your internal state becomes more balanced and coherent, pendulums find it harder to capture your attention. You remain aware of the world around you, but you are no longer easily pulled away from your chosen path. Even after you learn how to recognize pendulums and stop feeding them with your emotional energy, another subtle challenge appears along the path. In fact, it often shows up precisely when things start going well. According to the reality transurfing model, when your internal state becomes more balanced and less reactive, you may begin to align with what Vadim Zeland describes as a wave of fortune. This is a cluster of favorable lifelines where events begin to unfold more smoothly than usual. Opportunities appear almost at the right moment. Helpful people cross your path unexpectedly, and obstacles that once seemed difficult suddenly dissolve with surprising ease. Many people have experienced brief periods like this in their lives. Things seem to flow naturally, as if you are moving in harmony with a larger current rather than struggling against it. Your actions become more effective, and the environment seems to cooperate with your efforts. But this is exactly the moment when a different kind of internal trap can emerge. Ironically, the very success that appears during this phase can destabilize the process if it triggers a powerful emotional reaction inside you. The model calls this phenomenon excessive potential. Excessive potential arises when you attach too much importance to a particular outcome. In simple terms, it happens when a goal stops being something you prefer and starts becoming something you feel you absolutely must have. The moment you elevate a goal to the level of emotional necessity, you begin creating internal tension. Your thoughts revolve around it constantly. Your sense of self-worth becomes tied to whether that outcome succeeds or fails. This concentration of emotional pressure creates an energetic imbalance. Imagine stretching a rubber band tighter and tighter. Eventually, the tension becomes unstable. According to this framework, reality responds to that imbalance by generating what are called balancing forces. These forces are not punishment, and they are not evidence that the universe is working against you. Instead, they function like a natural mechanism that restores equilibrium when the energetic pressure around a situation becomes too intense. One of the clearest ways to understand this principle is through the example of an entrepreneur launching a new project. Imagine someone who has invested all their hopes, identity, and financial stability into a single product launch. Their entire emotional state becomes tied to the success of that one event. In their mind, the stakes become enormous. They tell themselves that everything depends on this moment and that failure would be devastating. That emotional intensity creates a powerful pocket of excessive potential. On the day of the launch, something unexpected happens. A payment system fails, a shipment is delayed, or a competitor suddenly announces a new product that draws attention away. From the outside, these events appear like simple bad luck. But within the transurfing model, they represent balancing forces that emerge to release the tension created by excessive importance. Once the event fails or the outcome changes, the emotional pressure surrounding it dissolves. The energetic imbalance disappears, and equilibrium is restored. The same principle applies to many other situations in life. Excessive potential can form around relationships, financial goals, reputation, or even personal identity. Whenever you place something on a pedestal and treat it as absolutely essential to your happiness, you unintentionally create the conditions that invite disruption. The mind becomes rigid and anxious, which often leads to decisions driven by fear rather than clarity. This is why the model emphasizes the importance of lowering importance without lowering commitment. In practical terms, this means caring about your goals enough to act consistently while remaining emotionally flexible about the outcome. You still work toward what you want. You still make plans, take action, and invest effort. But internally, you maintain a sense of balance and calm detachment. You approach your goals more like a skilled player in a game rather than someone whose entire identity depends on winning. A good player remains fully engaged in the process but does not collapse emotionally if a single move fails. This mindset creates resilience. When setbacks occur, they do not shake your internal stability because your sense of worth is not tied exclusively to the result. You remain adaptable and capable of adjusting your strategy without panic. In many ways, this balanced state is what allows the wave of fortune to continue carrying you forward. When you remove the pressure created by excessive importance, the natural flow of events can unfold without resistance. Opportunities appear more easily, and your actions remain clear and effective. In contrast, when anxiety and desperation take control, your perception narrows and your decisions become reactive. The path forward becomes clouded by emotional noise. Learning to maintain this balance, caring deeply about your direction while releasing the need to control every outcome, is one of the most important skills in navigating reality with clarity and stability. As we bring these ideas closer to practical application, one of the most important mechanisms in the reality transurfing model is something called an induced transition. This concept may sound technical, but its meaning is surprisingly simple once you see it in everyday life. An induced transition happens when your emotional reaction to an event shifts you onto a lifeline where similar events become more likely to occur again. In other words, your response to what is happening right now quietly influences what will happen next. Think about a common situation many people experience during an ordinary day. Imagine someone starting their morning with a frustrating commute. Traffic is heavier than expected, someone cuts them off on the road, and irritation begins to build. If that irritation grows into anger, the person's internal state changes dramatically. Their attention narrows, their patience decreases, and their perception becomes more focused on problems than possibilities. That emotional state can easily lead to the next event, An argument with a coworker, a careless mistake at work, or a tense conversation that escalates unnecessarily. From the outside, these events appear unrelated, but within this framework they are connected through the internal state that links them together. The emotional reaction becomes the bridge between one lifeline and the next. This idea does not mean that every negative event is your fault or that you must blame yourself whenever something goes wrong. The point is not self-blame. The real purpose of this concept is to highlight the power you have over your response. When you become aware of how your internal state shapes your trajectory, you begin to recognize that your reactions are not trivial. They are directional. Each reaction subtly tunes your attention and behavior towards certain outcomes rather than others. Because of this, one of the most valuable skills you can develop is the ability to observe your own reactions before they fully take control of your behavior. This requires a certain level of mindfulness. Instead of being pulled immediately into anger, fear, or frustration, you pause long enough to notice what is happening inside you. That moment of awareness creates a small but powerful space where you can choose a different response. Within the Transurfing model, this process involves learning to balance two aspects of your inner experience, the mind and the soul. The mind is analytical and strategic. It processes information, compares possibilities, and tries to plan the best course of action. In many ways, the mind is an extraordinary tool for solving problems and navigating complex situations. However, it tends to rely heavily on past data and logical predictions. It wants certainty and control, and it often becomes anxious when outcomes cannot be predicted precisely. The soul, on the other hand, operates in a very different way. It does not calculate or analyze in the same way the mind does. Instead, it communicates through subtle feelings and intuitive signals. Many people describe this as a gut feeling, a quiet sense that something is either right or wrong even before the mind can explain why. Within the Transurfing framework, this intuitive awareness is interpreted as the soul's ability to sense the energetic quality of different lifelines. In other words, the soul can often feel whether a particular direction leads toward harmony or toward conflict long before logical analysis confirms it. When the mind and the soul are out of alignment, people often experience confusion or a persistent sense of being stuck. The mind may insist on following a path that appears logical, while the deeper intuitive feeling quietly resists it. This internal conflict drains energy and creates hesitation. True navigation through reality becomes possible only when the mind learns to cooperate with the guidance of the soul rather than attempting to dominate it. Instead of forcing rigid plans onto the future, the mind begins to listen to the subtle signals of intuition and adjusts its strategy accordingly. When these two aspects of your inner world begin working together, your movement through life becomes far smoother. Your decisions feel clearer, your reactions become less impulsive, and you naturally gravitate toward lifelines that support your direction rather than obstruct it. This harmony between mind and soul is often described as the master key within the Transurfing model. It allows you to move through the space of possibilities with greater awareness and less internal resistance. Over time, this alignment makes it easier to remain centered even when circumstances change unexpectedly. Instead of reacting automatically, you respond consciously. And with each response, you gradually guide yourself toward the version of reality that reflects the state you choose to cultivate within. As these ideas begin to come together, something interesting becomes clear. The principles behind reality transurfing are not entirely new. In fact, they echo philosophical systems that have existed for centuries. Many of the concepts we've discussed, inner state shaping outer experience, the importance of mental alignment, and the relationship between thought and reality, appear in much older traditions. One of the most striking parallels can be found in the Hermetic Principles, a set of philosophical ideas described in texts such as the Kybalion. While the language is different, the underlying message is remarkably similar. The first Hermetic principle, often called the principle of mentalism, suggests that the universe itself is fundamentally mental in nature. In other words, reality emerges from patterns of consciousness rather than existing as something completely separate from it. When you compare this idea with the concept of the space of variations described in the Transurfing model, the connection becomes clear. Both perspectives propose that reality is not just a rigid physical structure, but a field of possibilities shaped by awareness and perception. Another Hermetic concept, the principle of correspondence, is summarized in the phrase, as above, so below. This idea suggests that patterns repeat themselves across different levels of existence. Your inner world mirrors your outer world, and the structure of your thoughts reflects the structure of your life experiences. In the language of reality transurfing, this is very similar to the concept of the reality mirror, the idea that external circumstances gradually reflect the internal state you maintain over time. The principle of vibration adds another layer to this understanding. According to Hermetic philosophy, nothing in the universe is truly static. Everything moves, changes, and vibrates at different frequencies. Within the transurfing framework, your thoughts and emotional patterns function like signals that resonate with particular lifelines within the field of possibilities. When your internal state changes, the lifelines that become accessible to you also shift. Finally, the Hermetic principle of cause and effect reminds us that every action and every thought creates consequences that unfold over time. Within the transurfing model, this principle appears in the form of induced transitions. Each emotional reaction, each decision, and each internal shift subtly redirects the trajectory of your experience toward different chains of events. When you step back and look at these parallels, you begin to see that many philosophical traditions are pointing toward the same insight from different angles. They are all describing a relationship between inner awareness and external reality. To understand this relationship more intuitively, the transurfing model often returns to a simple but powerful metaphor: surfing. Imagine a surfer standing on a beach, watching the waves roll toward the shore. The ocean is vast and powerful. No surfer, no matter how skilled, can command the waves to behave in a particular way. They cannot flatten the ocean or eliminate the currents beneath the surface. If someone attempted to control the ocean through sheer force, they would quickly exhaust themselves and fail. Instead, experienced surfers approach the ocean differently. They study the rhythm of the water. They observe how the waves form, how they rise and break, and how the currents move beneath the surface. They learn where to position themselves so that when the right wave arrives, they can move with it rather than against it. This is exactly the mindset that the transurfing model encourages when approaching life. The goal is not to dominate reality through brute force. It is to understand the patterns that shape it and align yourself with those patterns in a skillful way. A surfer does not create the wave, but they can ride it with remarkable precision once they understand how it moves. In the same way, you cannot control every circumstance that appears in your life. Unexpected events will still happen, and the world will continue moving according to forces far larger than any individual. But what you can influence is how you position yourself within that movement. When you learn to manage your internal state, recognize pendulums, lower excessive importance, and align your intentions clearly, you begin positioning yourself on lifelines where favorable conditions become easier to access. This brings us to one of the central paradoxes within the entire model. Many people believe that the key to controlling their life is to tighten their grip on every situation. They try to force outcomes, control every variable, and eliminate uncertainty. But the more rigidly they attempt to control reality, the more resistance they encounter. Their efforts become exhausting, and progress often feels fragile or unstable. According to the transurfing perspective, real control emerges in a very different way. Instead of gripping reality tighter, you learn to release that rigid need for control. You shift your focus inward. Rather than trying to manipulate every external event, you manage the one domain that truly belongs to you, your own awareness. When your internal state becomes calm, clear, and intentional, your interaction with reality changes. Your decisions become less reactive and more deliberate. You notice opportunities that once seemed invisible. Situations that previously triggered frustration no longer dominate your attention. In many ways, this approach resembles the mindset of a skilled navigator at sea. A captain cannot command the wind or the tides, but by adjusting the sails and understanding the direction of the current, they can guide the ship toward their destination with remarkable efficiency. The same principle applies to navigating life. When you stop fighting every wave and instead learn to work with the currents that already exist, your movement becomes smoother and more effective. Over time, This shift transforms your relationship with reality itself. You no longer experience life as a series of forces pushing you around unpredictably. Instead, you begin to see it as a dynamic environment filled with patterns you can learn to recognize and work with. This is the deeper meaning behind the idea that understanding this principle changes everything. When you recognize that your internal state is the starting point for how you move through the field of possibilities, you stop seeing yourself as merely a reaction to circumstances. You begin to see yourself as a participant in shaping the direction of your own experience. The waves of reality will continue to rise and fall, just as the ocean always has. But once you understand how to read them, you are no longer just drifting at the mercy of the current. You become someone who can ride those waves with awareness, balance, and intention. As we come to the end of this exploration, it's worth pausing for a moment to reflect on the deeper message behind everything we've discussed. At its core, the principle we've explored is not really about controlling reality in some mystical or supernatural way. It is about understanding your relationship with it. Most people move through life believing they must constantly fight against circumstances, push harder than everyone else, and react to every challenge that appears in front of them. They assume that success, peace, or direction will only arrive once the outside world finally changes. But the perspective we've explored today suggests something very different. It proposes that the true starting point is always internal. Your attention, your reactions, and your emotional state act like signals that influence the path you move through over time. When you react impulsively to every disturbance, you allow external forces to pull your focus away from your chosen direction. When you attach overwhelming importance to outcomes, you create tension that disrupts the very progress you're trying to achieve. And when you unconsciously feed the pendulums around you with constant emotional reactions, you end up investing your energy into systems that have little to do with your own path. But the moment you begin to recognize these patterns, something important shifts. You realize that your power does not come from forcing the world to behave differently. It comes from managing your inner state with awareness. Instead of reacting automatically, you pause and observe. Instead of chasing every external conflict, you choose where your attention truly belongs. Instead of treating every goal as a matter of life and death, you pursue it with dedication, but without unnecessary tension. When you adopt this mindset, your experience of life gradually changes. You become less vulnerable to distraction and emotional turbulence. Your decisions become clearer because they come from a place of stability rather than urgency. Over time, this creates a quiet but powerful transformation in how you move through the world. Opportunities become easier to recognize, conflicts lose their emotional grip on you, and the path ahead feels less like a struggle and more like a process of intelligent navigation. The deeper lesson here is simple but profound. The quality of your inner state shapes the direction of your outer experience. And while you cannot control every event that appears in your life, you always retain the ability to choose how you respond to it. That choice, repeated day after day, gradually shifts the trajectory of your life in ways that are often invisible at first but powerful over time. Before we finish, I'd love to hear your perspective. Here's a simple question for you. What is one pendulum you've recently noticed in your life that tends to pull your attention or emotions away from your own path? If you feel comfortable sharing, leave your answer in the comments below so others in this community can learn from your experience as well. And if this message resonated with you, consider subscribing to The Inner Code. Your support helps the channel continue creating thoughtful content like this, exploring awareness, personal growth, and the hidden patterns that shape our lives. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.